Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks very much for joining us this morning, and welcome to this investor webinar with Thunderbird Resources, ASX ticker THB. I'm Nicholas Reid from Reid Corporate, and it's a great pleasure to welcome George Bauk, the Executive Chairman of Thunderbird, to our webinar platform this morning. Well, antimony has emerged as one of the rising stars of the critical minerals space in recent months, spurred in part by China's decision to place export controls on this highly strategic metal, which is used in military hardware and high-efficiency solar panels, amongst other uses. The US has not mined or processed antimony since the closure of the Stibnite Gold-Antimony mine in the mid-1990s. The Inflation Reduction Act has put the US on a pathway to building its own critical mineral supply chain. And as mining columnist Barry Fitzgerald pointed out in a piece over the weekend, there's real potential for strategic metals such as antimony to become key weapons, given the looming prospect of a global trade war under a Trump White House. For explorers and miners, the key thing to focus on, as always, is the price of the commodity. And antimony prices have surged from around $12,000 a tonne at the back end of last year to record highs of over $37,000 a tonne last week. This in turn has translated into growing investor interest in a relatively small group of ASX listed players in the space, notably Larvotto Resources, which owns the historic Hillgrove Gold-Antimony project in northern New South Wales. Thunderbird Resources has put itself right into the heart of this exciting space, with a deal announced last week to acquire a large ground position immediately adjacent to the Hillgrove mine. We're very pleased to have George here with us this morning to run us through this transformational deal, to tell us what it means for the company, and also to give us a quick update on the company's other assets, its uranium exploration assets in Canada, and its very interesting copper exposure through its shareholding in Firetail Resources, as well as a stake in a copper project in Peru. So that's enough from me. I'm going to hand the floor over to George. But before I do, just a reminder to everyone tuned in, if you would like to ask any questions, this is intended as an interactive session. So after George has run through his slide deck, we'll take as many questions as we can from the floor. So please use the Q&A tab on your webinar browser and fire them in, and I'm sure George will be happy to answer them. So George, thanks very much. Congratulations on a fascinating deal last week. Please run us through what lies ahead for Thunderbird.
Great, thanks Nicholas, and thanks everyone for listening in. As mentioned, an exciting opportunity presented itself over the last few months to get exposure to antimony and gold as well in New South Wales. The company finished and completed its uranium exploration in Hidden Bay back in September, and from that, given weather coming into the Northern Hemisphere, it was an outstanding opportunity to look at a way in which we could continue the news flow and exposure for our shareholders into an exciting exploration project. As always, the disclaimer and forward-looking statement on our presentation, which we released this morning on the platform. So as mentioned, we just recently acquired the Rockvale project, which is surrounding the Larvotto's Hillgrove project. It's over 488 square kilometres, and as you can see there, outstanding potential. Really only a handful of players in the area. So Larvotto is the outstanding project. It's historically produced antimony and gold. And when you have a look at the pre-feasibility study and the economics of that project, with particular reference to the strengthening of the antimony price coupled with the gold price, the economics are absolutely outstanding. Located right near Armidale, which is a fantastic area, great infrastructure, universities, geologists being trained at the University of New England. We've got exposure of trig minerals. We have lode resources, critical minerals around us who are all exploring and looking for both antimony and gold. And also, I'd like to mention that when you do stand back and have a look at antimony and what its major deposits around the world are, and the Hillgrove project is ranked number 8 in the world. And I think when you have a look at the top 7, you'll see a lot of those are in jurisdictions which have geopolitical issues. And so therefore, this is an absolute standout project globally, looking to provide alternative supply chains for antimony. So being located right next door to this project is simply outstanding when it comes to mineralisation around us. So when we just dive in a little bit closer, Rockvale. So this is an area of having 5 or 6 areas that aren't contiguous, but they fall under one licence number. You can see there that there's a number of really exciting geological plays that surround the Hillgrove project. We've got a couple of major faults in the area that control the mineralisation, as well as what is believed to be a northwest trend extending out of the Hillgrove mineralisation, and we have a lot of exposure on tenements in and around that area. So just to the northwest of Hillgrove will be one of our earlier targeted areas, coupled with to the northeast around the Achill project, which has got historical results of around 4.65% antimony, which is around historical shafts and workings. Now, this area over 130 years ago was quite an active area for gold and gold exploration in particular. So there's a number of historical shafts that have been closed that have got results. Our team will be working through a really detailed historical compilation of all the data on our tenements to really get a better understanding of what the potential is in this area. So we'll be working through a lot of, as you can imagine, reports that are handwritten well over 100 years old that we have to go through, pull out all the data and digitize it. But you can see there, even further to the north at Girracool, we've got 18% antimony showings with over 590 grams of silver. So the amount of high grade antimony, gold, and even silver are absolutely sensational, coupled with, 100 years ago, the old time miners weren't chasing low grade material. So when you see some of these historical shafts going down 90 meters, they were chasing very high grade mineralization. Further to the north, we have the project Kookabookra. Again, this has got some really interesting gold and some antimony showings. We'll be going up there as part of a second wave. And almost due east of this project is where Trig have announced a resource recently, which is the Cattle Creek antimony project, or deposit, should I say. So in terms of the acquisition terms, so $150,000 cash, 30 million shares, which will be issued this week, and a series of deferred considerations, 20 million shares associated with achieving certain access requirements, coupled with contingent considerations leading all the way through to a PFS of with an NPV of greater than 150 million. So that's the structure that you can see on that presentation slide in relation to the terms of the acquisition, which will provide us with 100% ownership of the project. So as I mentioned before, we have commenced compilation of historical exploration, public available data. There's an enormous amount of data there to go through. We'll be identifying high priority targets for initial on-ground work, which will undertake mapping, rock chip and soil sampling, and coupled with detailed drone aeromagnetics. So when we compile all that together, I'm sure we're going to have an enormous amount of targets that we will want to start drilling as soon as practically possible. As Nicholas mentioned, antimony has enormous amount of applications. I mean, some of them relate to fire retardants, which has been an enormous area of interest with fires and damage to high-rise buildings. The strengthening of alloys, with in particular reference to lead, with the adding of antimony, batteries, lead-acid batteries, which still has a large role to play even in the EV area of cars. And then you've also got military applications. And when you then have a look at where the dominance of antimony is produced around the world, you can see that this has climbed up to being basically number 2 of priority with the US government looking to support diversity of the production of antimony globally. And you can see there the dominant players include China, Russia, and Tajikistan. So Australia play a role, and with the resources we have and with the up-and-coming production expected in early 2026 with Larvotto's Hillgrove project, being in and around that is an exciting place to be. and I think we'll see a lot of focus and attention on antimony. And it's also important to note that antimony is discovered and associated with gold. So it's a wonderful combination when you have a look at the ups and downs of commodity prices to have two revenue streams. So, when you dive into the feasibility study and economics of the Hillgrove project, it's got outstanding returns on their antimony revenue. But when you couple that with gold production, you can see that it's got great exposure. And so if there was to be softening of antimony price, you've still got a large amount of gold to be produced. So I think it's a fantastic coupling of two minerals with particular reference to the critical minerals of antimony. I'd also like to note that in our company, we've got an enormous amount of experience with critical minerals. So we've been involved in a number of supply chains that has looked to address the issues associated with critical minerals. So we'll be using that expertise to look at ways in which we can get support, be it funding or other mechanisms during our journey going forward. So whilst this is an exciting and fantastic transitional acquisition, I also like to draw attention to our uranium projects. Now, we're still big and believers in uranium, and we feel like we've got an outstanding portfolio of uranium projects in the Athabasca Basin. It's fair to say that the Athabasca Basin has the highest grade deposits in the world, and with the likes of Cameco, they've got the best deposits in the world in terms of high grade. We've seen the emergence of NextGen with their outstanding project, which was only discovered 10 years ago. And this is a really important part of the world for uranium production. And what has really been exciting in the uranium space has been the commitments and investments made by our major tech companies around the world, including Amazon, Google, Microsoft, who are backing nuclear energy to support their data centers, which in particular support their AI projects going forward. And when you have a look at how much energy is required for an AI search and that backing nuclear energy, it just highlights that we will see uranium rise again in the near future. So the Hidden Bay project, that's our real flagship on our uranium portfolio. We completed drilling there in September, and then that's down here located south of the Rabbit Lake project, which is one of Cameco's flagship projects. What we found in that uranium exploration program, we hit a couple of alterations, which is really critical in the search for uranium. We found low mineralization, which is exciting. And so we really believe there's a need for a follow-up program for the Hidden Bay project. It's located right next to a real critical Dragon Lake fault system, which is associated with the Rabbit Lake project. However, with the weather setting in the Northern Hemisphere, getting access and getting back to this project won't happen for some time. And you'll see there that that's a summary, pardon me, of the results and the interpretation that our technical team have done in relation to what we discovered in the drill holes, and that diagram there is in relation to hole number 5. And it really shows the potential to be sitting potentially right near a uranium discovery. Clough Lake, we recently put out the airborne survey that we completed back in June, July this year. And this project's located within 5 kilometres of the Stray Creek deposit, which is one of UEX's major projects of over 100 million pounds deep. But when you have a look at the interpretation by our geophysics guys, this survey has highlighted that our targets are really shallow and close to surface. It's also located near the historical Clough Lake mine, which is owned by Orano and produced over 60 million pounds back in the 80s. Again, this is just some cross sections of the interpretation of the geophysics airborne survey that we flew. And what it really clearly highlights is the potential for targets very shallow and close to surface. And we're talking around 200 metres below surface. Surprise Creek, an area that we're waiting for the data to come back from the airborne survey we flew. This here has got some outstanding results back from 1968 with 2 metres at 4.3%, from a very shallow 57 metres. So we can't wait to get back that airborne survey so that we can interpret and better understand what the potential of the mineralisation is at Surprise Creek, which we own 100%. As Nicholas mentioned, we've also got exposure to copper. And as you might have recalled, we were quite active in Peru back in 22-23, where the company had a Peruvian copper asset that we undertook exploration, took it all the way to drill ready. That project was transacted with Thunderbird Resources, which they completed a 5,000 metre drill program, number of positive results there from a copper perspective. There's a fantastic opportunity with the extension of the mineralisation through to a target called Itricola, which is being worked up at the moment. So when you have a look at our copper exposure, we still have just short of 5% of Thunderbird Resources, which is 16.5 million shares, which translates today to around $1.6 million that we have potential access to. They're currently drilling a very exciting VMS system in Canada, the Skyline project. And so we should see great news flow out of that project. We still have 30% direct investment in the Pitcher project through our shareholding in Kiwanda, which owns the asset in Peru. So great exposure for us. It's been an asset which has yielded a positive return for us. And we also have the Surprise Creek project, which I mentioned before about the uranium potential, but it also has copper potential as well in terms of mineralisation. So this here just highlights some historical drilling. So those numbers on the left there at Bob Lake and Ellis Bay are actual historical drilling of copper mineralisation. We've done some surface work, and again, the airborne survey that covered the whole land package with particular focus on the uranium, but it'll also give us some extremely interesting information to be able to put together what the potential is of copper in this area. So what's the proposition of Thunderbird Resources? As mentioned at the outset, we've done the pivotal acquisition to pick up the Rockvale project, antimony gold project in New South Wales, located near Armidale, and surrounds the very highly prospective and exciting project of Hillgrove, owned by Larvotto. And we'll be working that up from now going forward, and work has already commenced there. And that couples with an exciting uranium portfolio that I've just taken you through, and our exposure to copper. So exciting times ahead for Thunderbird Resources. Just briefly, top 5 shareholders, market capitalisation around 5.5 million. So we see fantastic upside in this story. Board and management, I've been associated with the company for 4 years, had exposure in critical minerals, uranium, nickel, copper. Gary Billingsley, who's based in Canada, Robin Wilson, our technical director, Joe Graziano, and we're well supported by strong technical groups around the world. So that's our story, Nicholas, and really looking forward to the next 3 to 6 months of what we're going to provide news flow to the market in relation to the Rockvale project.
Fantastic. Thanks, George. That was a great run through. We'll move on to questions now. And again, a reminder to everyone who's tuned in, please fire your questions in using the Q&A tab. George, if I could just start with a fairly broad one, just looking at the map that you put up in your presentation. We always say in the WA goldfields, as you know, that the best place to explore for gold is next to a gold mine. So presumably the same applies for a gold-antimony mine in New South Wales. But that ground position, you're close to a number of ASX companies that are making a fair bit of noise about antimony, treat critical minerals, load resources, etc. A fantastic position right around the Hillgrove project. Can you tell us a bit about who put that package together, how you came to get hold of it, and maybe a little bit of, the sort of historic work that's been done there as well?
Yeah, so look, the actual land package was picked up by a group of people that set up the company Kuki Proprietary Limited. This was picked up around 3 years ago. So basically during the time of COVID, if you like. So they were looking at areas that had open positions, great prospectivity, like you mentioned, its association with Hillgrove. So this position was available, bunch of guys that were focused on other areas, and it was only recently where they decided that it was an opportune time to look for someone to take this land package over. So it's controlled by a guy, Mike Haynes. So Mike is the major shareholder of Kuki Proprietary Limited. And so we got presented this only a couple of months ago. And it was an opportunity that, we thought was a great exposure to antimony. And as you mentioned before, nothing beats being in the shadow of a headframe. And when you look at how close we are to Hillgrove, we actually surround their tenement package, and we're a long strike from their mineralisation. So, we just saw this as being an enormous opportunity. A lot of the workings go back, as I said before, up to 130 years ago. So this is an area that there's been an initial data compilation by the team at Kuki. And so we've looked at that data, and we're now working through that, extending it to the real richness of the detailed information available, and now looking to get on the ground and really follow up and work those key target areas. And sorry, as you mentioned, there's only a handful of players. A number of players have got quite large land packages. So it's not a quilt that has hundreds of explorers, which is good and bad, but this has really been concentrated amongst 4 or 5 ASX listed companies.
Thanks, George. That's a good segue into our first online question here. An investor asks, what is the priority for development, antimony or uranium? And he also asks, what's the ETA for first shipments? So maybe if you could give us a sense of, I suppose, which of the two has the potential to be developed quicker, if you like.
Look, this is going to be our priority now. As I mentioned before, when you've got the Northern Hemisphere winter and it's very hard access into the Athabasca Basin just purely on weather, this has provided us with an opportunity to be able to work on the ground. The access to this project's phenomenal. That road infrastructure, for anyone that knows regional New South Wales, you can drive around you don't even need an SUV to drive around those land package areas. So the road access is phenomenal, located 5 hours from Brisbane and Sydney. So we're going to really focus on this area. Our real number one aim is to complete the detailed data, get access to the ground, and really focus in on following up key areas that you'll see in the presentation of high-grade numbers, historical shafts, and work with some airborne surveys. There's been no real modern exploration done in this area. So to go back on the ground, hit it with airborne surveys, and to really light up and give us priority targets to get a drill rig on this. In terms of ETA, we've got to go through the exploration process and make sure that we have a discovery. And once we have the discovery, we can better answer the question on ETA.
And I think it's also worth just highlighting again the Larvotto story, perhaps, George, if you could, just for the benefit of investors watching, because they're obviously looking at they've, I think, got a PFS or a feasibility out on their project. They're looking to restart that operation, and you're sitting right next door to it. So presumably that would be a logical sort of processing option for anything that you find.
Yeah, look, the Larvotto acquisition, which was about 12 months ago, it's previously been mined, and some people always think about what happened and the circumstances of low commodity prices, lack of attention on antimony and so forth. But that picked up an asset with what I'm led to believe nearly $100 million of underground mine development that's there ready to be accessed, probably $150 million worth of plant assets on the surface. So that picked up an asset that I think it's $73 million, I believe, is the number within their feasibility study to get Hillgrove into production. Their numbers of production include 5,400 tonnes of antimony and 40,000 ounces of gold. Now, recent revised numbers based on increase in commodity prices, they actually will produce from their antimony, they'll make money on that alone. So I think the number was around $700 an ounce that they will make, or they'll have negative costs associated with their gold. So even if you said that they broke even on their gold, they'll produce 40,000 ounces of gold. At 4,000 Aussie, that's 160 million free cash. So for $73 million investment to get this up and running and producing a free cash of north of 160, when you add the credits for the antimony, the economics are simply outstanding. And this is not a project that has not had the historical production. So this has produced antimony and serviced the world before. And this, I believe, will be end of 25, early 26 when they'll come into production. So it's the 8th biggest project in the world. And again, many of those others are in China, Russia, Tajikistan. So when you take those regions out, this is literally one of the best projects in the world. And the economics really support it when you look at the feasibility study and the amended numbers that have been recently put out by Larvotto.
Fantastic. Thanks, George. A couple of online questions now relating to your Canadian uranium projects. The first one is, can you confirm that assays are pending for the Hidden Bay project?
Yes, they are. So they've been received by SGS in Saskatoon, and so we're awaiting results back from those assays from the drill program in September. Excellent.
And a follow-up question, what is the status of the Hook Lake project, which I don't think was touched on in the presentation?
Yeah, no problems at all. Would have loved to have, you'd like to update every project, but always have to prioritise. But Hook Lake, that currently hasn't had any work done in the past 12 months. There's an outstanding system in Saskatchewan where you have the ability to, money spent on a project means that you get good standing for a period of, you accumulate the money spent, and that's divided by the expected expenditure on the ground, which relates to $15 per hectare. And so you get good standing grace for a period of time. So look, at the moment, it hasn't been a priority. It's a project that's got great potential, as people would have seen back in 2020, 21, when we picked up this land package from, I've got mental blank in the name of the company. We picked it up, the private company, but our partners are Sky Harbour Resources, who are the 20% owner. And we've got some plans to go back there, but we've got to prioritise, and unfortunately you don't have endless amount of money to be able to work all your projects, but it's still got great potential.
Great, thanks, George. There's another question here, which is, I think, it's a good one, relevant to operating in New South Wales. How supportive is the New South Wales government towards these types of projects?
Yeah, look, New South Wales has a very structured approach to the way in which explorers work on the ground. You've got a lot of agriculture in New South Wales, so there's very structured processes in which explorers and miners can access areas that there's coexistence with other use of land. So the New South Wales government is very supportive in relation to the ability to access the ground, compensation for landowners and so forth. I think it was last Tuesday that there was an announcement in relation to explorers having the ability to explore underneath solar farms. So that was a ruling that was passed through government to say that explorers can actually work in and around critical energy systems like solar farms. So we see the New South Wales government as being very supportive. I know there's been some other cases lately of issues, but we've seen a lot of support from the local community and government in and around Armidale.
Excellent. Thanks, George. I think we've covered all the online questions, so we might just a broad one just to wrap things up. You put up a slide showing the sort of news flow, so perhaps just bring it home for people. You've obviously got to go through a process to get on the ground and start drilling in New South Wales, but I'm sure there's going to be milestones leading up to that. So perhaps if you could just give us a flavour of what the news flow is likely to be for Thunderbird over the next few months.
Yeah, so look, in relation to the antimony project, we'll be putting out results once we've compiled the historical data review. So that'll give people a lot more richness around the data associated with the tenements that we've acquired. We'll then be working to gain access, and we're hoping to get on the ground very early January to start our on-ground work. So it's only a couple of months away, but there's a lot of preparation that has to be done behind the scenes to make sure that we really target areas, put the planning into getting the geologists on the ground to actually start those work programs. So over the next 3 months, you'll probably see historical work being compiled and presented to the marketplace, and then activity associated with starting on the ground and working towards that drill program. We'd hope to be drilling within 6 months on these projects, but a lot of work has to be done to get to that point, if you like. Other news flow includes finalisation of the Hidden Bay exploration program with the assays that are pending. We're also waiting for the survey results to come from Surprise Creek, so we would hope for that to be out before the end of the year so that we can show the market what the excitement is, both for the uranium potential at Surprise Creek coupled with the copper potential at Surprise Creek. And then, as a side note, we've got that investment in Firetail, which hopefully will see news flow from the drilling at Skyline in Canada. So that's got an indirect benefit to shareholders at Thunderbird in relation to our treasury of 16.5 million shares exposure into Firetail.
Fantastic. That was a great run through, George. Thanks very much. Appreciate your time this morning, and a reminder to everyone, if you're interested in reading some more about that. Oh, hang on, sorry, we have got another question which I'll just take before we wrap up. The question is, given your current cash runway, what is your thinking around future funding options?
Yeah, look, we've got a number of alternatives. I mean, we've got the treasury associated with the Firetail shares, and we've still got cash in the bank where the next 3 months is going to be a low burn when it comes to the activities we need to do. So it's quite a low expenditure associated with historical data review, and then once we get on the ground, again, it's in New South Wales, so a lot cheaper to get access to the ground in terms of mobilising a team there and all the infrastructure in Armidale. So we'll look at some options we've got in relation to our portfolio to see how we can monetize what we have within the company, so we can minimise what we need to do from a cash need point of view.
Fantastic. George, thanks again. Appreciate your time this morning, and certainly looking forward to following the Thunderbird story over the coming weeks and months. And thank you to everyone for tuning in this morning. George is available if anyone would like follow-ups or one-on-ones, and I think he's also heading over east in the first week of December. He'll be presenting at our Resources Rising Stars conference in Melbourne on the 5th of December. And he'll be around on the East Coast. So anyone who'd like a one-on-one with him while he's over East, please reach out either to George or myself. George, thanks for joining us. Congratulations on the acquisition, and best of luck with Thunderbird.
No worries. Thanks, Nicholas.
Thanks everyone for joining, and have a great morning.